For decades, 2 women were officially listed as victims of crimes no one could prove. Witnesses talked. Evidence existed. Suspects were known. But the cases went nowhere until science caught up. In Rhode Island, investigators reopened files that had been collecting dust for over 40 years. What they found didn't just answer questions. It rewrote history, named killers who would never stand trial, and finally gave families the truth they were denied. But before we go ahead, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Does your country revisit cold cases? And what do you think about revisiting cold cases? Is it good, or does it sound like a waste of time and resources? Number 1. Debra A. Stone. For decades, Debra's murder remained unsolved and her family had no official closure. Modern investigative techniques, long interviews, re-evaluation of witness testimony, and comprehensive record reviews allowed the cold case unit to bring clarity to a 41-years-old mystery. Debra A. Stone was 24 years old in the summer of 1984. She was living in Cranston, Rhode Island. In 1984, Cranston was Rhode Island's third-largest city, after Providence and Warwick, a densely populated suburban/residential community bordering Providence to the north and east, with a population of roughly 76,000 to 79,000 people. In August 1984, she was reported missing after last being seen on August 29, 1984. On September 2, 1984, boaters discovered a female body in Narrow River. The body was later identified as Debra A. Stone. A medical examiner conducted an autopsy and determined that Debra's cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation, meaning she was killed by suffocation from pressure on her neck. Multiple witnesses later confirmed that she was at the apartment of Robert D. Jeremiah in Johnston, Rhode Island that evening. This apartment is the last confirmed location where Debra Stone was seen alive. One witness told police that he assisted in moving Debra Stone's body from Jeremiah's apartment to a vehicle. Her body was then transported to Narrow River, in Narragansett, Rhode Island. But his confession was dismissed after he failed a polygraph exam. Though his confession became significant later, because it aligned with the condition and location of the body when it was recovered, and matched consistent testimony from other witnesses. Another person reported seeing Jeremiah shortly after Debra's death, and said that Jeremiah admitted he had to kill her because she was stealing from him, according to the cold case review documentation. Robert Jeremiah, however, initially told investigators that Debra had stopped by his apartment earlier asking to barter a stolen watch for drugs, which he claimed not to have, and drove her back to her apartment in Cranston. He also claimed that Debra had died from an overdose, a claim later disproven by the medical examiner's findings regarding neck trauma. Her death required direct physical force applied to the neck. This directly contradicted Jeremiah's initial explanation to investigators, in which he claimed she had overdosed. However, despite witness statements, Jeremiah's inconsistent explanations, and medical evidence contradicting overdose, no charges were filed at the time. Investigations stalled due to lack of charges, concerns about witness credibility, and confidence in the available evidence following a failed polygraph test on Jeremiah. In 1995, Robert D. Jeremiah, who was known to be involved with drug distribution in New York City and had potential mob ties, died at the age of 43, reportedly of natural causes. His death meant the case could never proceed to trial unless charges had already been filed, which they had not. For decades, Debra Stone's death remained officially unresolved. In 2023, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office established a cold case unit to reopen historical unsolved murders, including Debra Stone's. The unit re-examined original records and conducted new interviews with over 30 witnesses, finding that statements remained consistent over time. Using this renewed investigation, investigators checked the object they found during the recovery of Debra's body in the river. One was a rope found which is used in tying the body. A cinder block used to weigh down the body. A hand glove recovered from the scene, which was caught in the ropes wrapping Debra's body. A piece of carpet removed from Jeremiah's village apartments with stained areas noted between white placecards, which is similar to the one recovered in Debra's house in 1986. Investigators reaffirmed the medical examiner's conclusion that the cause of death was strangulation, not overdose, contradicting Jeremiah's original claim and confirming the violent nature of the crime. Debra was indeed murdered by Robert D. Jeremiah. The killing occurred in his apartment on August 29, 1984. Evidence from witness interviews and scene analysis supported this conclusion. Because Jeremiah died in 1995, no prosecution was possible, but investigators stated publicly that there was sufficient evidence to assign responsibility. The case was formally closed in October 2025. Why the case failed initially? The failure to prosecute in 1984 was not due to lack of evidence of homicide. It was due to reliance on witness testimony without physical corroboration, limited forensic capabilities, reluctance to proceed against a suspect perceived as dangerous. These factors, common in older homicide cases, allowed the crime to go legally unanswered for decades. Number 2. Cynthia McKenna. Cynthia McKenna was 49 years old and living in North Providence, Rhode Island, in early 2007. Friends and associates described her as someone whose personal life had become increasingly unstable in the period leading up to her death, largely because of a turbulent relationship with Robert J. Corey Jr., a former U.S. Marine who served in the Persian Gulf War, with whom she had a documented history of conflict. Prior to 2007, Cynthia had accused Corey of domestic violence. McKenna had filed domestic violence charges against Corey in 2005, but were dismissed after McKenna failed to appear in court. And some people close to her were aware that arguments between the two were frequent, and sometimes intense. On February 21, 2007, officers from the North Providence Police Department were dispatched to Cynthia McKenna's apartment to conduct a welfare check. The request was made after concerns were raised by her landlord, who had been unable to see her and believed something was wrong. When officers entered the apartment, they found Cynthia unresponsive in her bedroom, lying in bed. Emergency assistance was attempted, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. She was found tucked tightly in her bed with 2 pillows over her face. Police uncovered the bedding around McKenna and found a sock stuffed in her mouth and tissues stuffed up each of her nostrils. The condition of the apartment immediately shaped the direction of the investigation. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing suggested a burglary or random intrusion. The bedroom showed no evidence of an accidental medical collapse that would explain her death. From the outset, investigators understood that whoever was responsible likely had access to Cynthia and did not need to break in. An autopsy conducted by the Rhode Island State Medical Examiner established the cause of death as asphyxiation due to blocked airways. Cynthia's airway had been blocked in a manner consistent with external interference. This was not accidental suffocation, and it was not the result of natural causes. The medical findings confirmed that Cynthia McKenna had been intentionally deprived of oxygen. Her death was ruled a homicide. As detectives worked to reconstruct Cynthia's final days, her relationship with Robert J. Corey Jr. became central to the case. Witnesses described a hostile dynamic marked by repeated disputes. Cynthia's prior allegations of domestic violence against Corey were documented, and friends told investigators that the relationship had become volatile. While this established motive and opportunity, it did not, on its own, provide enough physical evidence to support an arrest in 2007. Although police couldn't determine Corey's exact whereabouts at the time of the incident, later in 2007, investigators also intercepted written correspondence that added a disturbing layer to the case. In late 2007, 2 letters and an envelope allegedly authored by someone using Corey's name were recovered at the Adult Correctional Institution in Cranston. In those letters, the writer spoke directly about causing Cynthia's death. A DNA profile was recovered from the envelope, but it was not in the combined DNA index system, CODIS, database at that time, so investigators could not link it to a suspect. Without a direct forensic link and lacking eyewitness testimony to the act itself, prosecutors were unable to move forward. Despite strong indicators of homicide and suspicion toward Corey, no charges were filed in 2007 due to absence of eyewitnesses to the act, lack of DNA match in national databases, limitations in forensic genealogy at the time. The case remained unsolved. Robert J. Corey Jr. died in 2014 at the age of 52. His death occurred before any arrest or prosecution in connection with Cynthia McKenna's killing, effectively freezing the case in an unresolved state. In 2023, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office created a cold case unit to re-examine unsolved homicides using modern investigative tools. Cynthia McKenna's case was reopened as part of that effort. Investigators returned to the original files, re-interviewed witnesses, and reanalyzed evidence that could not be fully exploited in 2007. The breakthrough came through advances in forensic science. Investigators used YSTR genetic analysis to compare the DNA from the envelope with DNA from male relatives of Corey. The YSTR results indicated a direct male familial match between Corey's relatives and the DNA found on the envelope. Additionally, handwriting analysis confirmed that the confession letters were written by Corey himself. The letters alone were insufficient for prosecution without corroboration. Combined with corroborated witness testimony and gaps in Corey's alibi, investigators concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that Corey authored the confession and was responsible for Cynthia's death. Based on this body of evidence, the letter, the DNA match to relatives, Corey's hostile relationship with Cynthia, and the pattern of witness statements, in 2025, law enforcement formally identified Robert J. Corey Jr. as the perpetrator of Cynthia McKenna's homicide. Because Corey died in 2014, so he cannot be charged or arrested posthumously. Nevertheless, authorities stated that the evidence was sufficient to attribute responsibility for the crime and to close the case with an official finding. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to read them. Subscribe and share the link to your friends. Thanks once again, and hopefully I will see you on the next one.